Tell me a little bit of my story here on Veterans Day 2022. This is in front of a church that basically split whenever I become saved there under Brother Eaton. And that circle right there that you see, I can't stay here too long, is basically where I had an encounter. This is Tansom Cemetery right here. Basically where I had an encounter with the Holy Spirit, God the Father, going around the corner in the opposite direction, going toward Sharon, Tennessee. This is Highway 89 in Northwest Tennessee. I'm in Weakley County. And as I was going around the corner heading toward Sharon, Tennessee, I remember that it was almost like dusty dark. I think they call that dawn or something like that. But it was still light enough that you didn't necessarily have to have your lights on, but you probably needed to have your lights on. I remember Randy Davis was in behind me. For some reason, he was acting absolutely crazy towards trying to act like he was going to pass and then not pass and then act like he was going to pass again. But this was March 23rd, approximately 24 hours after that I had received my spiritual crown, the crown that was placed from heaven upon my head on my birthday, that began over by 430 Beach Grove Road, or at the time it was just only called Route to Sharon, the old home place where I was raised up at, in which I'll show you a picture of it too as well. But that's where I was fishing on the day of my birthday, and all of a sudden angels come down from heaven and started doing something phenomenally to me in placing a spiritual crown of thorns upon my head that even to this day, that was in 1988. This is in 2022, approximately 34 years later. I can still remember it just like it was yesterday, and I can still feel the anointing as well as the crown of thorns that was placed upon my head. At the time, whenever I come out with my story, everybody and their brother thought that I was a lunatic, or they thought that I was just saying these things in some sort of a jokinably aspect of way, and they made fun of me and they mocked me, because whenever I stood out into the eyes of the general public, I started telling people about my testimony. Now, I just recently have drawn this drawing right here of a body right here on this particular road right here. You'll get a little closer. You'll see where there was a body right there at one time, and that body was my body. That was my body that was put there whenever my brother, and I don't know who else was in the truck with him, but we had just got through leaving Sidonia store, and I had a Snickers bottle in one hand, a Mountain Dew bottle in one hand, and a Snickers candy bar in the other hand. And we had just made it around this corner, and the type of old truck that we was going back to the hayfield in only had chains that kept the tailgate from going all the way down to where now they've got lock-in hinges that basically do that, but it prevents from the tailgate coming up so easily. And he got over on the side of the road and he hit a pothole, and as soon as he hit the pothole, the vehicle went down, and then the vehicle went back up, and whenever the vehicle went up, it basically bucked me out of the bed of the truck going down the road doing give or take 55, 60 miles an hour, and kind of like a drunken Bronco. And needless to say, it knocked my little body up, because at the time I wasn't but about 10 years old, heading to the hayfield. poorer than dirt. And whenever I come back down, there was no tailgate for me to sit on. In other words, whenever I went up, the vehicle went up, but the vehicle went down quicker than what I did, and whenever I come back down, I basically hit the asphalt, rolling end over end over end, that broke my left arm, broke my left collarbone, and basically should have, I guess, killed me to some degree, because it could have very well broke my neck or put me in a coma or concussion all of my life. And I was in a concussion for about 3 days, basically knocked out. Didn't know daylight from dark at the time. But I woke up and they had to reset my left collarbone, and they put a cast on my left arm. And I considered myself a very, very lucky human being. Even though I was only a child and I probably didn't weigh 65, 75 pounds. That was just the beginning phases of many other injuries towards attacks of the devil, towards him trying to take me out and eliminate me, towards me not being able to once more fulfill my divine purpose. The circle, on the other hand, there on Highway 89 in front of Victory Baptist Church, of the story that I was going to tell you earlier, we just passed the original church that I had gotten saved in before it caught a fire along about 74, and they built it back, and I think they completed it somewhere around 76. May have been a little before that. But for some reason there was a split in the church. People couldn't see eye to eye, and one group of people went one way and the other group of people remained and stayed where they was, and basically divided the First Baptist Church up to the magnitude that where I draw that circle at, whenever God completed the spiritual crown of thorns that was placed upon my head approximately 24 hours after the angels of God placed the, I guess you'd call it the thorns themselves in my head. That 24 hours later, me going around that corner was whenever God completed the cycle towards hitting the bullseye and opening up the first seal of the book of Revelations. Also, my movement was so, I guess, mind-breaking, or I guess what else would be the right word to use? Not mind-breaking. Life-changing. That particular movement that happened in my life, March the 23rd, around that corner, of completing the cycle, or the sickle, that it talks about, that in the last days that the earth bringeth forth fruit of herself, first the blade, then the ear, then the full corn in the ear, but when the harvest is come, he putteth in the sickle. That sickle was in fact that same crown of thorns that was placed upon Jesus Christ's head 2,000 years ago, in reference to the beginning phases of the opening of the seals. Now it says in the Bible that no man can open thy seals. No man was found worthy, either in heaven or on earth or under the earth, towards opening up the seals. And one of the elders said, "Weep not, for the tribe of the Lamb of Judah have prevailed to open thy seals and to open thy book." I had no idea that these things was going to occur in my life. I just knew that I was in the process of fasting and praying and taking about 170 something pages of scribbling and trying to make sense out of it, towards me documenting my life and interpreting my own writings that was so bad at the time, and still is, pertaining to my English, that it took me several days, several weeks to be able to take all that material and basically take it off of a paper form and put it on a cassette form at the time, because that was the predominant thing at that time, was cassettes. This was in 1988. Okay. I don't think that I can get out there, and it probably don't really make no difference if I do. So I'm just going to point my finger, I'm going to point my camera over here and show you that from this fence row right here all the way down right through there used to be where Dad kept all his equipment. He kept his tractors and his discs and his breaking plows and his cultivators and etc. all lined up right there. That way it was out of the way, that it wasn't just right up here on top of us, because there used to be a big barn over to the right hand of where those grain bins are right now. We're the ones that basically paid for the grain bins and put the brand new grain bins in along about 1976 or 77. The house where I was raised up at was right here. This is where the old farmhouse was. And this was my grandfather's original estate. Whenever him and his wife come back to Tennessee after the 1929 Depression, they had to go to Chicago and work for a few years before things started leveling out in the rural areas. And he stayed up there for them. They stayed up there for about 7 or 8 years before they moved back. And whenever they moved back, this was the property that they bought. They bought this whole piece of ground right here, and a property on the other side, which I think is about 42 or 44 acres. But the reason why that this particular piece of ground meant so much to my grandfather is that during the late 30s, early 40s, probably right before or during World War I, his father, which would be my great-grandfather, Jeff Jackson, both of them got together and they started using a old pond scoop, and they dug out a big pond right there and built a big levee. And give or take, that pond at one time used to be probably about 1.5 acre to 2 acre pond. At one time, that pond probably used to be as much as 10 to 12 foot. Now it's filled in. But I can remember when we first moved back from Chicago down here in 1967, in the summertime, we would play out on that pond swimming, and there, I've seen as many as probably 15 or 20 kids out there swimming at the same time. I swam out there quite frequently by myself, to the extent that one time I was swimming out there and I wound up hitting something at the bottom of my foot that felt awful warm at the time whenever I hit it. And as soon as I get out of the pond, my foot was lacerated basically on the top, where it almost cut my whole foot in two, but it got down to the tendons that move your toes. And my brother rushed me to Dr. Jack, and Dr. Jack said, I can't do nothing for him. You're going to have to take him to Union City and sew him up. And that's what they done. But there's been times on that old pond right there that in the wintertime it would get so cold that the ice would get so thick that we'd get out there and we'd ice skate and we'd play hockey out there. At one time, we had my brother Chevelle on top of the ice. At one time, we had a boat in that pond. And of course, the boat basically couldn't do nothing but go around and around in circles with a short rope on the back end of the boat, while my brother was water skiing, because he had a love for nature and a love for doing those kind of things. We used to have big tires that we'd cut in half and use them for rubber bands, big rubber bands, and we'd tie them between two trees, one on this side, one on that side, and we would take corn cobs or rocks and put in those rubber bands and pull them back, and we would shoot the rocks or the wet corn cobs over the pond and try to hit one another with them towards having fun. I couldn't tell you the amount of times that I've had fun out there. That was basically my little playground whenever I was growing up. This was before the Davis family, Gary Davis and his family, moved up here where Donald Ridgway used to live up here on the corner. I think Gail still lives there. Used to be the McDermott's at one time. But I was fishing on the north side of that pond when all of a sudden I heard something flickering, and I looked up, and the only thing that I could see at the time was the imagery of something. I couldn't detect what it was. It was huge in size, but as I was looking and heard what I heard, all of a sudden I felt this zap in my head that felt unlike anything that I had ever felt before in my entire life. And I'm still fishing. This is the day of my birthday, March 22nd. And I'm thinking to myself, whenever I first felt that and experienced that, I thought, you know what? I must be going through some sort of hallucination. I must be cracking up. But then a few minutes later, it done it again. And the thorn went about an inch from where that thorn was and sunk deeply into my head, that even to this day, you can feel the indentions and probably even see the indentions if you really get to looking real close. But whenever it happened a second time, it freaked me out. It scared me. Because I knew then that it wasn't my imagination. This was really occurring in my life. So I dropped my pole, I dropped all my stuff, and I turned and I started running from the pond back over to where that fence row is right there. And at the time it had a decent fence on it because we used to have hogs in here, and we used to have some cattle and horses and stuff like that in here. But I tried to jump the fence and I misjudged it, and I wound up clipping the top of the barbed wire that caught the top of my shoe and basically flipped and almost broke my neck in trying to get over the fence. At the time, my automobile was right here. Okay, this was in 1988. I had a little red Dodge Ram truck that was fairly new, that I basically had achieved enough money in making a down payment after me cleaning up the old Zorabelle Lovelace estate, that I went out and bought this little Dodge pickup truck. But I ran as hard as I could through that field right there, getting around all that equipment. Like I said, there was equipment all the way down this fence row, and there was equipment all the way down that fence row. But I had to get over this fence. There was another fence right here, which fortunately I got over that fence all right because I took my time a little bit better. Got in my truck and pursued towards going to Kenton, Tennessee, where my grandmother was living, up towards Texas Gas on Highway 45W, going between Kenton, Tennessee and Union City, Tennessee. But as I was going to Kenton, Tennessee, I kept feeling these supernatural events go into my skull as I was driving down the road. And of course, by the time I got the third or fourth thorn in my head, I was so spiritually exalted that I was driving, but I was basically not within my right frame of mind towards driving, but I was still doing okay. Went to Kenton, turned right, stopped at the 2 red lights, and kept going until I got to my grandmother's house. That at the time, she was living, her and my mother was living in a house that her half-sister used to live in. Her name was Lily Ring, that was married to Jim Ring. And I remember they was both sitting on the porch, swinging, in which they had a tradition of doing that every afternoon. And I remember pulling up and basically cutting the key off on my truck And as soon as I opened the door, I basically fell completely out of the truck. And I was laughing purposely to the point that I could not stop laughing. And I was basically spiritually exalted. I was drunk in the spirit. Of course, at that time, I didn't know it. At that time, I didn't realize that I had even pulled up at my grandmother and my mother's place there where they was living. And my mother gets off the porch and runs down there because she sees that instead of me getting out of the vehicle like I should have, I fell on the ground. And I'm laughing, purposely just laughing and laughing and laughing. And finally, she gets down on her knees and she pulls me over because at the time I was basically on the side of my side in a side position. And she said, "Dennis, what in the world is wrong with you?" And I'll never forget, I was staring up at my mother and I said, "Mom, me and Jesus is laughing." She goes, "What in the world about?" I go, "We're laughing because Slewfoot, the devil, Satan, Beelzebub, the Luciferian Lucifer," which I didn't say all those words, but they all mean the same thing. I said, "Lucifer is a liar. He's always been a liar. He's defeated, and the time has come for him to surrender." And whenever I said those things, my mother looked at me with such sincerity in her face and in her eyes. She said, "Son, you need to come with me. You need to go to bed." So I went ahead and stood up. She helped me stand up. She helped me to the porch and helped me get into bed. And she admitted that whatever was going on with me that day was not under the influence of alcohol because she didn't smell no alcohol nowhere on my clothes or on my breath. And I wasn't drinking. And I wasn't doing drugs. And I wasn't smoking weed. And I wasn't doing none of the above. You keep in mind, I had been fasting and praying over at my grandmother's house, Miss Audell Jackson's. It's just right around the corner here, less than a quarter of a mile, towards taking all of my material and taking it on paper form and putting it on video form. I woke up the next morning. I didn't have a job at the time. 1983. I was still in the process towards trying to recuperate from falling off of a 4-story building, having 2 broken legs and 2 crushed ankles, and trying to reinvent or readjust myself towards getting back on my feet, not knowing what was going to occur towards me becoming self-sustainable again. I knew that I didn't want to wind up getting back up on little bitty beams, walking way up high towards connecting steel towards putting together commercialized buildings. And I also knew that prior to that fall, before it got real cold, I was called upon by Social Security of going to Smyrna, Tennessee, for them to test me and to see what I was capable of and what I wasn't capable of towards rehabilitating me. I remember while I was up there, that's whenever Dad gave me a call, or I called him, one or the other, and told me that he had just recently traded my brother's crossbow for a PV guitar and amp. And whenever he said that to me, I literally almost went into a rage because that crossbow meant so much to us in 1976 whenever my brother got killed, that we actually took an engraving of the bow and put it onto the headstone because my brother was such of a great hunter, and it meant so much to him in being able to bow hunt, crossbow hunt. And like I said, he was a naturist. He loved nature. He loved being out in the woods. He loved going hunting. He loved going skiing. He loved going swimming. He was a naturist. He loved nature. And whenever he told me, my dad told me that he had recently just got rid of that bow, my throat basically went to the bottom of my stomach, and I thought to myself, my God, that was a family heirloom. That was something that we had put aside purposely because it meant so much to us, not only towards my mother having a son and my father having a son, but the brothers to another brother. It meant so much to us that we was willing to do that. And of course, I couldn't tell you the endless amount of times that all hell would bust loose either on this side of the road or on that side of the road, towards screaming and hollering, and my dad losing his cool, towards wouldn't be able to control his emotions. Like I said, those 2 grain bins right there, we built basically off of the death insurance that my brother had with Goodyear. That basically was $50,000. That, as far as I'm concerned, was probably one of the biggest mistakes that my dad made in the early 80s, because shortly after that is whenever all the interest rate went up and all the gas went up and everybody started losing their farms left and right. But I don't think he filled maybe one of them up half full, but never did put beans in the other one. And then 2 or 3 years later had to declare bankruptcy. So he took that money that he invested on those grain bins, I don't know how much he put down, but basically lost every penny of it whenever he filed for bankruptcy. The point that I'm trying to make is this: where I had put the engraving of a body a while ago that you've seen that was on the highway going towards Sharon, whenever I fell out of a truck doing about 50 or 60 miles an hour, whenever it put me in a coma for about 3 days, that was one close encounter of death that I come in contact with. Right down the road, less than a half a mile, going towards Obion County, right before you get into the Obion County, Weakley County state line, or county line, there was another freak accident that happened. This was in 1983, where I almost lost my life whenever 2 hands miraculously come out of heaven that grabbed both of my wrists, whenever I lost 9 units of blood, and I wound up having to get operated on towards losing my spleen. I couldn't tell you the amount of good times and bad times, not all bad, but a lot of really, really bad, towards the screaming and the hollering and the yelling and the tantrums that my father would have towards not being able to control his temper, and how that we was abused on a day-to-day level, either on this side of the road or on that side of the road. Now, whenever we first moved down here to Tennessee, that's whenever all the friends and all the people decided to come and become friends with the Jacksons, which was a good thing. And then my grandfather died in 1969, and that's whenever my father turned his back on the Lord, and that's whenever he basically backslid. So whenever somebody tells you that that people cannot backslide, when I know that they can, they're only lying, because people can backslide to the degree that my father basically become possessed come possessed of a devil, and basically turned his back on God. And once he turned his back on God, he turned his back on us, because his father was no longer around to dominate him or dictate to him. And that's whenever our father become a whole different human being. Whole different human being. And of course, the little get-togethers that we used to have out here, either in the winter or in the summer, all that alternated and changed, because our friends, they didn't want to hang around and possibly take on a beating like we was being beat. So basically that ended the party towards anybody coming over here. And whoever did come over here, my father expected for them to work or to leave, because they was basically hindering his help, which all us 4 boys was nothing more than slaves, free labor to him. Plus, we was a whipping post to him, because he was so agitated in his own spirit, and plus having post-traumatic stress disorder in regards towards being in the military, he wigged out. And whenever he wigged out, he this tractor is getting fresh dirt here. They're trying to, I guess, take down this hillside right here a little at a time, and they come down here from time to time and take this property right here. Used to belong to us two right here that he's on right now, this tractor. Big old tractor. It's like a caterpillar. That's probably what they call that tractor, is a caterpillar tractor. But anyways, I'll have to get out of the road again because he's a-coming. I was raised up here from the age of 7, whenever we moved from Chicago, that my brother literally hated. Danny hated this place down here up until he started getting some friends and getting acquainted with various people in this area. He literally hated it here because he had done already become accustomed to become accustomed that guy was rolling. I had to get plumb out of the road again. Got the phone turned upside down. He was rolling. I don't know how many square yards of dirt that he just picked up, but whatever it was a lot. This little shed right here we built, poured concrete in the floor, and it was basically the only shed that we had around here that had concrete floor in it. The other garage was right here that Dad never did pour concrete on it, and it was his sister that paid for the concrete porch that finally she felt enough hardship for, that she paid out of her own pocket towards us having a concrete porch poured on the old property before everything basically went haywire in the early 80s, whenever he had to declare bankruptcy. And like I said, I was trying to readapt towards falling off a 4-story building with 2 broken legs, 2 crushed ankles, 3 crushed vertebrae, 2 ruptured discs, 2 broken arms, laid in the hospital 6 weeks, 3 days, flat on my back in Madison County Hospital in Jackson, Tennessee. That's where he just got through digging that dirt, right there. And that's whenever that occurrence took place in my life, with the car rolling over on top of me. And then in 1988, on my birthday, while I was fasting and praying, because I just recently went through a second divorce with a Miss Diane. Her dad's name used to be Beasley, or was Beasley. Fred Beasley and Lucille Beasley. I don't know if Tony Beasley, which would be Diane's brother, is still living in Martin, Tennessee or not. I've never tried to look him up or hunt him up. But we used to farm all this hillside right here before all that growed back up. I couldn't tell you the amount of times that we picked okra up on top of that hill right there. This used to be a road bed right here. And over to the left over here was another little patch, give or take probably about an acre, that we used it for strawberries, picking strawberries. Now, I've told people about the hornet's nest. The hornet's nest actually come from this area right here whenever me and Dwayne dug the hornet's nest out and put 2 eyeballs in it and a mouth, and we was down by Marlon and Linda's place trying to scare people. One night he would roll me up in tinfoil, and the next night I'd roll him up in tinfoil, until a group of people decided that they was coming home from coon hunting and decided that they was going to start shooting at us like we was either Martians or we was target practice. And that's exactly what they done. They shot at us, and at that particular point in time, it was my night to be wearing the tinfoil and the hornet's nest, and I wound up running up towards the old Pratt's Lane. That used to be a lane there, an actual lane that you could drive down. I went through a bunch of honeysuckles and briar patches over into Bill Ramsey's field and left a trail of tinfoil from, let's say, from the edge of that road right there all the way up for probably a half a mile. You could see little pieces of tinfoil where they were dropping off my body because of where all the wild honeysuckles and the briars and stuff ripped the tinfoil loose. And of course I didn't have no other alternative other than to take the hornet's nest off of my head. I don't know what happened to the little flashlight. We'd stick a little flashlight up there and make it look like we had red eyes and a red mouth, you know, just kind of having fun as kids out here. I couldn't have been much over probably 13, maybe 14 years old. And shortly after that is whenever Dwayne's dad wound up getting a settlement, and then in 1976 is when my brother died. But I just wanted to show people those 2 markings, and I probably should have went ahead on this particular video, went on up there and showed you the other marking that I had placed just this side of the Obion County line, where I almost lost my life in 1983. But I've got a lot of history here. Some of it was good, some of it was ridiculous, and some of it was horrifying. I went through so much that I know that whenever I tell my story, a lot of people don't believe my story because it almost sounds like an unbelievable story. But whenever you get traumatized again and again and again over all them different injuries that I had, and I did have multiple injuries beginning at the age of 2 weeks whenever I was born into the world up in Waukegan, Illinois, and I had to have a kidney removed at the age of 2 weeks, which was absolutely unprecedented in 1961 for them to take an infant and operate on an infant and take an infant's kidney out. That was absolutely unheard of in 1961, right near. They was doing experiments on infants at that time. They didn't have near the knowledge with incubators and all this other stuff that they got today, to where if a child is born premature, they can basically put him on a life support system and save his life within a certain amount of time after the child is on this incubating respirator. They didn't have all that back then that I know of. They may have had something in the form of it, but it wasn't nothing up to date like it is today. And of course, I almost got electrocuted to death at the age of 4 whenever the fuse box downstairs blowed up, almost caught the house on fire, and did catch the curtains on fire, and probably would have caught the whole house on fire. It just happened my mother was washing dishes whenever all that occurred. Whenever the fuse box basically had a ball of fire come out of it, and that's whenever I was upstairs playing with some keys and stuck some keys into an electrical socket. So I have a whole lot of history here. This tree right here, that's that big. I remember helping my grandfather plant that tree in 1968. He died in 1969. He was still in good enough shape. But there used to be a whole line of trees all the way down. I'll show you real quick. All the way down down that road right there that my grandfather planted, and stayed that way until the early 80s, and then Melvin Hill bought the property. I don't know, I've forgotten when he bought the property. It seemed like it was, I don't know, a little too much for me to think about right now. But whenever Melvin Hill bought the property, I believe he went in there and bulldozed a lot of that stuff down because it was going to interfere with his farming because of all the roots and stuff. We left that one tree because that was the corner lot that basically the only thing that we could save out of the old folks home taking advantage of us for letting our grandmother stay in a nursing home for 10 years, and then all of a sudden they popped a bill on us for about $30,000, and we didn't have the money, and the only thing that we know to do was to sell, I guess 40 acres is what we sold. I don't know for sure. It may not have been quite that much. It may have been more than that. I don't know. But we sold a piece of property from basically where that fence row is all the way down to that pond again. And we kept this right here, which is basically about 1.5 acres. We kept this, what you're looking at right here, where the beans used to be. That's Melvin Hills, and basically where them tires are going that way is our property. And the dividing line on the property was basically where my brother and his wife, Monica Graves at the time, planted a bunch of pine trees. And this is one of those trees right there. You can see how huge it is. And right here was the other line of trees, right there. And basically the property line is somewhere right in there. It may be off 3 or 4, 5, 6 foot right there. But anyways, the property line was basically from there all the way to the road, which covers that big tree, that big tree that I helped my grandfather plant. See it right there. And then the property line goes back this way of the area that I just showed you. Goes down that way, all the way down. And I know that my story probably won't mean a hill of beans to nobody else. Won't mean a hill of beans to nobody. But you know what? I couldn't tell you the amount of times that we plowed, worked, cut hay, combined. Matter of fact, my brother was out here one day before he started working at Goodyear. And of course, you'd go around and around and around, you know, using this little old tractor, using like a 8-foot disc or 10-foot disc or whatever. I think finally we may have expanded to a 14-foot disc, where now they use stuff like 40-foot disc. But he lost his billfold out there one time, and we looked and looked and looked and looked and looked and never did find his billfold. One winter, like I said, we used to play on that pond right there where the pond is. One winter, it snowed so much, the Davis family went up north and bought two brand new Yamaha snowmobiles. I think they was Yamaha, they may have been Honda. And man, did we ever have a time out here in the wintertime doing about 70 or 80 miles an hour back and forth, riding them snowmobiles that basically nobody else even began to even know what snowmobiles was down in the South, because first of all, you couldn't afford them, and second of all, it wasn't reasonable to buy snowmobiles in the South, because the winters in the South ordinarily didn't last near as long as what they did up north. So I've got a lot of memories. Used to be a old wooden barn right here made out of original logs, where my grandmother used to have a bunch of pigs. Used to be an apple orchard right here. My dad turned it into a little garden spot right there. A lot of memories, a lot of years, a lot of time and effort that it took to till the ground, and like I said, we lost part of it, but we didn't lose it all, fortunately. Whenever some difficulties happened in our lives back years ago, before I was ever even an adult, towards knowing what life was really all about. But I thought I'd share my story with the two impressions that I put on Highway 89. Whenever I was about 10 years old, I fell out of a pickup truck going to a hayfield. And then the other impression going around the corner was where the supernatural occurred towards the Heavenly Father, finishing off the crown of thorns that was placed upon my life, towards me seeing basically the edge of the kingdom of God. That the only way that I know to describe it, even to this day, is that it looked like a front. I'm gonna use that analogy, like a real strong cold front, or some sort of a display in nature pertaining to what was going on there. And it was just about this time of day. It wasn't dark, but it was kind of twilight, and I was going around this corner. Well, I had an idiot in behind me that was trying to, I thought he was trying to race me. I thought he was trying to knock me off the road. I thought he was trying to pass me. I didn't know what he was trying to do, because he was just acting just crazy as far as I was concerned. Of course, back then, the way people acted, including myself, was probably about halfway crazy. But I remember seeing a deep darkness that went from all the way to one side of the earth, all the way to the other side of the earth. And it was total darkness, but at the same time, I could see half the sky that was light. And all of a sudden, there was a white little cloud that come from the bottom of the darkness that started rolling and tumbling. It looked like a tornado coming directly towards me. Just about the time that I was coming up on that corner, and just about the time that I actually got to the corner, was whenever the cloud was no longer in front of me. Now the cloud had engulfed me to the point that I felt a centrifugal heat go around my body that was so powerful. The only thing that I could think of, by gripping both wheels, not knowing per second what was going to happen, me driving around that corner doing 45 mile an hour, heading east, going towards Sharon on Highway 89. The only thing that I could think of as I was going around that corner is that the centrifugal power and the heat that was coming from what I was experiencing was so intense. If I would have stuck my arm outside the window of the vehicle, I truly believe that my arm would have disappeared. It was that powerful. It was that strong. But at the same time, I felt love and I felt compassion and I felt grace, because I knew that the exchange of the events that occurred in my life 24 hours leading to that, of me fishing at this pond, throwing down my rod and reel, almost breaking my neck because of I was frightened, I knew that the Heavenly Father had chosen me to do something special for Him. But at the time, I didn't have all the pieces put together in 1980 and 1988. I just knew that I was supposed to complete my material that I even talked about on those 9 tapes. And I know that whenever that supernatural occurrence took place that particular evening, which would have been the 23rd of March, I wound up going to Martin that same night. Whenever I bumped into the same set of Arabs that was at a gas station, that at the time I didn't see them, I didn't have to see them, because I heard them and I felt them. While I was pumping gas, they was hooping and hollering, going like a wolf, woo, all of them together, making all those strange sounds while I was pumping gas, knowing that I had just got through witnessing something that most people in a lifetime never gets to witness. A week prior to that is whenever I met these Arabs over in Martin, Tennessee, the guy with the little knife that they call Magic Man. And then a few days later, Dwayne Davis and Dayton Earl Peaney talked me into going to a nightclub, Cheers nightclub, whenever the same group of men targeted me again and put a piece of cloth in my pocket that was basically a demonic cloth that symbolized the Luciferian Lucifer. I know this. I was skeptical of whether or not I actually seen what I seen the night that Randy Davis was in behind my vehicle acting like a clown. And I got to questioning myself about a week later of whether or not all that stuff was real. And for some reason, I went up there beside Eddie Pierce's where Mr. Suter was, and he used to have a gas station up there. And I pulled up there to fill up my gas, and me and him got to talking, and he explained to me that that night, which would have been basically about a week ago, he seen and felt the very exact same thing. So that helped to verify in my mind that I wasn't hallucinating, that I wasn't imaginating, that it did in fact happen, because God said that He would verify of 2 or more witnesses, and He did. And that's what puts me to where I am right now, towards living here and making all these videos and telling my story and trying to alert people about the end time events, and trying to tell them about my testimony, and trying to tell them about how that God had showed me that the world is predicted for not only the river Euphrates to dry up, but basically the whole planet pertaining to the fresh water supplies, because of all the damages that mankind is doing to our planet towards draining all the oil resources and the other precious resources out of the ground. That's going to pretty well end this pertaining to my story. Thanks again for listening on this particular Veterans Day. I'm so glad that I got to make this on Veterans Day pertaining to honoring those who have sacrificed so much in various wars here in America. In these last days, towards seeing biblical Bible prophecy fulfill itself.